Corruption at the highest levels? You're kidding. It would never happen. Let's get into it. Well. All right, guys. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us as a fellow member of the most mocked religion in all of history, and proudly so. We are disciples of Christ. If you want to help make disciples, help spread this discipleship effort, then go ahead and follow us here. Give us 5 stars if you think we earned it. Give us a like, a subscribe, all the stuff that helps, be good little slaves of the algorithm that pushes this out to more people. And if you got questions based on this episode, then you can text those in to 509, because we're representing for Eastern Washington. What? 509-867-0070. Text those questions. 509-867-0070. Proverbs 20 for today is where we're getting our wisdom from.
Here we go.
And Proverbs 20, verses 10 and 23 pretty much say the same thing. They say this: unequal weights and unequal measures are both alike an abomination to Yahweh. Unequal weights are an abomination to Yahweh, and false scales are not good. Explained also by the prophet Amos in chapter 8. He says, when will the new moon be over? Or they are saying, when will the new moon be over, that we may sell grain? And when will the Sabbath be over, that we may offer wheat for sale, that we may make the ephah small and the shekel great, and deal deceitfully with false balances? What that means there in Amos 8 is that they want to make the ephah small, meaning an ephah is a measure of grain or barley or something, and so they want to make that smaller. They want to trim quantities, and then can we make the shekel great so we grow our money? So we trim quantities, we grow our profits. If you go to a fancy restaurant these days and you pay $97 per plate, and they give you one lima bean, and they tell you that you should like it because it's fancy, and the restaurant has a French-sounding name, that's exactly what they're talking about. Moral of the story: French cuisine is a vehicle of great evil. Sometimes it's tasty, though. But today we're going to be talking about corruption of all kinds. And I do mean all kinds. Corruption, especially at the highest levels. I think our open door here to this subject is corruption at the highest levels of corporate America, which is it's kind of its own unique blend of gross, because big corporations employ a lot of people. They do, they allow a lot of men to put food on the table for their families and so on. So there's a lot of good that comes from it. And then you get these smoky backroom situations up top where the guys do really messed up stuff in order to keep the gravy train rolling. And so it's this mix of guys that are dependent on this company for their job, and they're honest, but the company's not doing honest things and whatever. You kick all that up to the governmental level. It all boils down to individual corruption in the human heart. It's just a big ball of yuck when it comes to corruption and sin and the human condition and all of this. So today, we're going to do something that some may call an abuse of power. I call it executive privilege, because I get to bring on this show anybody that I darn well please. And my guest today is someone who is being courted, might I even say clamored over, by news outlets. We're talking CNN, Netflix, BBC. I don't even know what. I'm just listing stuff off randomly. I'm hearing Sky News now at this point because he's got a story to tell. He's dropping big truth bombs on one of the world's biggest companies and his former employee. And that's not what we're going to spend most of the time talking about, but we're going to get into that a little bit. And it's the providence of hilarity that he also happens to be my dad. So I used my inroads, and I was talking to him. I said, "Hey, Dad." And I gave him the puppy dog eyes. And I said, "Please, Dad, can you come and do my show with me? Come on a podcast episode, and we'll have a conversation just generally about corruption as it stands and as we see it in the world today." Comparing that, of course, to biblical worldviews and the biblical explanation for why things are the way that they are. And, I can talk about corruption all day long in the abstract, but when you see it in front of your face, it can sometimes take you a little while to figure out what you're looking at, because by definition, it's something that is corrupt. It's not working the way that it's supposed to work. And so it can be confusing even while it's normal. And so, I probably should have gotten into this with my guest, the great Merle Meyers, before we turn on the microphone so that I would know what my parameters are. But I've never been one for caution or considering consequences. And so I'm just going to let you. You've seen it from the earliest days. So I'm just going to let you take this wherever you want it. Something led up to this conversation, and I'll just say it was a brief invitation for you to retire from your post at a job. So why don't you give us a quick rundown of Just kind of what led up to this and what started our conversation about this whole conversation.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. And it wasn't a courting type situation. I think these news outlets kind of just tolerate me. Like, give me 15 minutes or whatever.
Yeah.
But no, it's about being in the workplace, having a job for 31 years, and becoming a manager. And then the last 15 years was on off and on, really butting heads with a different set of values. Two different people in this company. There's those that abuse, go around the documented process, break the rules, and including those who look the other way because, they don't want to stir the pot. They want to be promoted someday. And
they got friends, and that can be awkward and things like that.
Yeah. And then there's the other side, the people, a tremendous number of them at the Boeing company that really they love the company. They want the company to succeed. They know they got the best documented processes in aerospace manufacturing. Why not use them? So there's that back and forth. And it's been a lot of really butting heads with people that I would tell them to their face they should not be in quality. They shouldn't even be in aerospace. And most of them kind of, just let me do my thing, say my piece and go through these corporate investigations and then send them back as unsubstantiated. And the head office then in Chicago had assigned an ethics advisor. I had my own special personal ethics advisor because they didn't want me to go to the press.
They were advising you, or they were advising
to keep me out of trouble. And, go deal with HR on this one, go to ethics on this one.
Okay.
Corporate investigations.
A hand holder.
Yeah. Okay. And this was a very dedicated hand holder. It wasn't somebody like HR, they're just going to cover the company's butt, and the employee that raises the concern, you're toast. Yeah. So this is a very personal Boeing employee with the ethics group. And it kind of went on, and then it got adversarial. There was a new Speak Up program. And then all of my complaints towards other managers with unethical behavior, it all got channeled through the Speak Up chain of command, and people are, after all these years, are going, who the heck is this guy?
So a Speak Up program, this sounds like something where they're encouraging employees where, like, if you see something, say something type of thing?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they create a program labeled, hey, we're super transparent about everything, and we want your feedback, and then if I'm understanding you right, then when you give that feedback, they kind of single you out and they watch you. They give you a hand holder.
Yeah, if you're attacking managers for meeting schedule.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, it's schedule driven, no longer quality driven. That went away after the merger. Mm-hmm. So the Speak Up program that came into existence after the MAX crashes. Every time something big happens at Boeing, you're going to have your CEO, your upper echelon. They're going to circle the wagons. We're going to try harder. And we mean it this time, and we're going to do this and that. And
please, baby, please. Yeah. I've changed.
Yeah. Again. Right. And so, and then the media goes away, and nothing changes.
Sure. So, and the way the news cycle is these days, that probably it happens quicker than it used to.
Yeah.
I mean, I get the impression that when these guys go in front of Congress and stuff, and they do their routine, it really is it's a photo op for congressmen too. I mean, they make their speech, and some of them have really put the screws to Boeing executives.
Senator Cruz.
Oh, Cruz.
Yeah,
boy.
Cruisinator.
Cruise missile. Yes, he let him have it. But at the same time, it's like the public does get bored with that stuff, and the cameras go elsewhere after not too long of a time.
That's true. But now the difference is you have these whistleblowers coming out. And by the way, I was never a whistleblower. I'm in that honored category. But the news, they came to me, the New York Times. Someone passed my name around, and the Times called me, and I said, sure, come on.
So you didn't seek it out, and that's what technically separates you from like a formal whistleblower?
Yeah. Okay. So I did not go through the pain and the being ostracized or labeled a malcontent or a bomb thrower. I did several times through my management career in meetings and stuff, but not to the media.
Yeah, that's just good old-fashioned personal attack. That's not a public smear campaign.
Yeah, and the whistleblowers go through the public smear campaign. That's a real good observation. So it was a matter of the company used to go around quality. In the old days, they revered quality. When your grandmother was a designated manufacturing inspection representative, she would sign off the airplane.
It can fly because my grandma said it can fly.
Yeah. And her name was on the placard back in the back wall of the cockpit. It was amazing. And they had unstoppable power. They could stop an airplane from moving through production until that problem was fixed.
And side note, she was doing that in the 60s and stuff before it was cool for women to be in executive positions, right?
Yeah, well, she hired on in 73 as a clerk.
Okay.
Yeah, and then she got into quality, and then quality management, very good quality management at that time. They saw that she had what it takes to be a designated representative of the FAA while you're getting paid by Boeing.
Yeah.
And so they moved her forward, and that was how a single mom, no college degree, was able to rise through a company as great as Boeing.
Yeah, and so you are... I mean, you're Boeing. I don't want to say aristocracy, but there's a legacy there. Like
nobility is fine.
Nobility, yeah, right,
Yeah.
right. His Eminence here, Merle Meyers. Yeah, and so when it comes to quality and airplanes and stuff, I mean that's an ethic that you really did inherit. Mm-hmm. It's something that's kind of deeply ingrained. You didn't learn that in an orientation class. You kind of came up in that.
I came up in it, and then of course your grandmother, who we talked about, and then your grandfather, aeronautical engineer at Boeing, missile program. He was in the Black Hole. And before that, he was a fighter pilot and the first mayor of the city of Briar at age 32.
How about that?
Other than that, he hasn't done anything with his life.
Never amount to anything, no. That guy. Yeah, you've always, when I was growing up, you've always used a term airplane guy. You would distinguish, this person's a manager that's just, you're like an executive or something that's just out for their own promotion and they're climbing the ladder. They're thinking about their next gig. They're greasing palms, or whatever. Maybe I don't mean that literally in terms of paying people off, but they're doing the politic thing, right? And then you've got airplane guys that really are worried about putting a quality airplane together, and that was kind of the big cultural distinction that you always made with me. Am I reading that right?
Yeah. We want our customers to love us.
Okay. Yeah.
And
that's what we used to say, right? If it's not Boeing, I'm not going.
Yeah. And, we'd almost be kind of say that with a smirk. Yeah. It was pride. But then after the merger, of course. Leadership took over, and really the Douglas side that technically got bought out. They got the real stock deal where they could have like a more majority vote. That's when you started seeing people bypass, like Alan Mullally, the real airplane people, the men and women like that were getting bypassed. And then they got these folks, these Jack Welch, GM or GE money people. So they went from being obsessed with engineering and technological innovation, my Boeing, to chasing Wall Street. They were enamored with Wall Street, and that's where we're at ever since.
Yeah, tell that story about what you said something one time about how they spent an extra $1 billion or something and delayed a process or a release of a model like 4 years or something just to get it right when they didn't have to. What was that?
Okay, so we had the 767X. I mean, it's gone about as far as it could with the technology and everything. They have an opportunity to either make it better, throw in some new technology, amend the certificate or the certificate, and we'll call it the 767-300 or X or whatever it is. So we can do that, and that's going to cost a lot of money. That'll take, I think, 3 to 5 years waiting to get it certified, or we can make a new model, and that's going to take 5 to 9 years and a lot of money. And Alan Mullally, a friend of mine who was on his team when the 777 was starting up, she was in the meeting. And Mullally said, we're going to go for a new model. And that turned out to be the 777.
Spend the money, spend the time.
Take the time.
Do the new model.
Make the customers love us. Find out what the pilots want in that cockpit. And that was a big part. It was so centered around the pilots and the airline customers. And a lot of that's gone away, of course. So anyway, the 777 was a huge success.
Yeah, and an engineering miracle from what I understand. Yeah. I mean, I grew up with you telling me stories about how they would stress test the wings. They had to make new equipment because the wings could stretch longer than the equipment could push them. Right? Just like, how did they pull this stuff off? Was that the 777 where the wings, they actually got the wings to touch over the top of the plane?
I can't remember which. I think it was the 777. They came. I know they came close, but
Wow.
I don't know if they touched or not.
We're going to go ahead and say they touched.
Well, they touched.
It's
I was there.
documented.
Yeah.
Bare feet.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, so this time around, after, I call it the McBoeing culture, where we merged with McDonnell Douglas, who was really in the tank. The GE Jack Welch model is cut costs. You get rid of your top 10, 20% of your brightest engineers because they're the best paid. They're gone. That kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So the decision was made, are we going to make a new airplane, or are we going to make a derivative of the 737? So the decision was made. Unlike the Malloy model, well, let's make a new airplane. It's going to be, we're going to call it the MAX. And so by the rules, it can only take, like minor changes. The MAX had major changes, engines, and then moved off the center of gravity. Really complicated wiring systems. A new wing, new tail. It's a new airplane.
But they called it the same thing.
So they called it the same thing. And what happened is when you're not able to make a new airplane, you cannot upgrade that new airplane with all the latest technology. So some of the 737 technology, I'm told by a former FAA inspector and a Boeing engineer, some of that technology that was incorporated into the MAX was 4 decades old. A new airplane, this wouldn't have happened.
Yeah,
so,
and this from the same company, which, and granted, a different division. This is military versus commercial or whatever. But I was just talking to a Chinook pilot, and he said, this is a couple weeks ago. He said, the Chinook since Vietnam has not had substantial changes, and they're still rolling off the line because the design was so good. They just haven't really had to mess with it. And it's like, we know how to do things right. Mm-hmm. So it's an intentional choice not to do things to the standard of quality that is almost your comfort zone at that point, right? Mm-hmm. Like, how to do it. Why would you not do it? So there's the question for you. Why would you not do something right when it would be easy to do it right?
So the Boeing leadership was looking at Airbus, their big competitor, and they have different size airplanes for different markets. So they're competing. And Airbus is getting the A320 with the new Neo engine to the market. Boeing had to rush to market. So the penalty was not going to be that substantial waiting, because you will get caught up when you have a superior airplane to your competitor. The sales will rack up pretty quick. Mm-hmm. But it was a rush to market. And it turned out to be a rush to kill 346 people.
In which crash was that?
That was, you had the Lion Air, the first one, and I think 5 months later you had Ethiopian Airlines.
Yeah. Now the A320, was that the Airbus that had the double decker all the way back?
That was the A380.
Oh, I hated that airplane.
So yeah, it was weird. The 747 is called the Queen of the Skies. I call the A380 the Fat Mistress. So that's our secret. That goes nowhere. Okay,
keep that between us.
Yeah, and when they were putting that together, when I was a rep, we were living over in England. I would tell Airbus reps that because we shared the same suppliers, right?
Sure.
Yeah. So yeah,
yeah. I remember I got the call from Mom. I was on a mission trip, and I couldn't sleep that night, and I was in a different time zone. So Mom called me. I think she forgot about the time difference or something, but it just happens I wasn't sleeping, right? Just couldn't get to sleep. It was one of those nights. And so she calls me and she says, she tells me the whole thing about how your longstanding partnership with Boeing, where you provided your work for their compensation, that had been gracefully terminated. And so I got so mad, and I'm like, these guys, they move us across the world in our formative years, and my dad gave everything to those guys. And I heard about the meetings and stuff. You'd knock heads with these guys in an effort to put quality airplanes in the air. I mean, you spilled blood in the mud for that. And so I was just kind of ranting, and I said, Mom, I'm in a different country right now, but I hope I fly home on an Airbus. And she goes, don't tell your father that.
She said, bite the tongue.
Yeah, she said, that stays between us. We used to call them Airbus and Scarebus and all sorts of stuff. And now it's like, it's sad because you want good competition. You want two really solid companies putting out solid airplanes, because then they have to outdo each other. And when one company tanks, whether that's just in public perception or whether it's in actuality, that's a sad thing, because then the impetus for the other company to have their A game, that impetus goes down, right? Mm-hmm. So everybody loses.
Yep.
And it's all just because they're letting the spreadsheet and the calendar drive it.
Yeah, and there's not capacity for one of these manufacturers to go away. We need Airbus.
Right.
And they're making a good plane.
Yeah, it's a good plane.
No doubt about it. And we need Boeing, but we need Boeing healthy.
Yeah. Well, and that's something I like, with these interviews you're doing and stuff is you're saying, you're giving a very optimistic message. You're saying, look, the processes are still there. A lot of the people are still there. They could turn this around. Mm-hmm. This isn't a lost cause. You just got to get rid of some of these guys that aren't going to do it.
You do. And you have, of course, the CEO. You saw what happened to Muhlenberg. You saw what happened to Calhoun recently. And it's an interesting deal because they look like they don't care. But, is that really fair saying that? But they moved the office to Chicago from Seattle, then Arlington, Virginia. They're getting pretty far away from the men and the women that twist the wrench and do the functional tests. And
every day that you don't spend on the floor, you lose touch with what's going on the floor, right?
Yeah, you're right. And then also, they don't know because they're not airplane men and women. They're money people. Mm-hmm. So if you have somebody sitting on the Boeing board from Starbucks and then somebody from J.P. Morgan or whoever, they're not going to understand airplane issues and the needs of the people from these two unions, the SPIA and then the IAM. You're not going to understand it or care. You're going to want your bottom line. You're not going to be in the long game for, how's this going to work decades down the road?
Well, yeah, and it makes sense. I mean, if you're brought in to boost profits and give good returns to shareholders, and you're saying, well, we're going to sacrifice that in order to make a superior product, you're, in a certain sense, you would literally be denying your mandate and not doing what they brought you in to do. And that's one of the things about corruption is it doesn't always look like... It doesn't always look like we initially think. When we think of corruption, we think of people having secret conversations that can't be recorded, and then there's an exchange and a quick handoff that nobody can see, and then everybody snickers, and and evil things happen. And certainly that's a common form of corruption in politics and business and whatever. But sometimes it's just like it's a tainting. It's like it's mission drift, where mission drift would be morally unacceptable, and yet they do it because of profits or whatever, right? And so that's what you're describing here is that, like, well, these guys come in with a certain agenda, and it's not the agenda that serves the customer best, which in this case, the customers are trusting the company with their lives, right? Mm-hmm. It's not what serves the general public best, but it is what serves their bottom line. Well, that's a even if they're open about what their intentions are, those are corrupt intentions.
It's self-interest.
Yeah, it's a perversion of the standard.
And that is, you call that corruption, and that's 100% right. I just call it evil because I bring that word into the conversation, and people will say, God, that is evil. Even unbelievers will say that because we think of evil as genocide. You and I work with homicide, suicide survivors. We work with people that have seen evil in full session. Mm-hmm. And you in Latin America and us in Africa, that's pronounced. But evil is also, it can be lack of transparency. It can be withholding information to get your goal. Like in Boeing, you have competing managers in production. If I would be in a meeting with the vice president, stand-up meeting daily, a vice president was usually there. A senior manager from manufacturing said, the flap on that 767 tanker was taken off my plane there. And the VP should have said, this meeting is over. I want to know the names of those SOBs responsible by close of business today. No, that was that senior manager's problem for having that flap stolen from him. That was assigned to his airplane.
So they create a dog-eat-dog world.
They create a dog-eat-dog world. And what gets rewarded? The Darwinistic survivor. Mm. Yeah, Darwinism in business is good to a point, but you got to have some God-based ethics in there too. You don't steal, you don't lie, you don't cheat.
Well, yeah, so, evil... It's funny, you invoke a word like that, and I can picture people in the business world trying to strain their brains to operate in moral categories in a business environment, because usually you don't. You operate in a bottom line paradigm, mm-hmm. right? Like, okay, what's gonna get our product out the door quicker and turn the profit and whatever. But there is such a thing as evil. It's not all utilitarian, right?
Right.
And all that stuff that we saw in Africa and all that stuff that you see in the third world that keeps those places being the third world, I mean, it's corruption, it's evil. but it starts with stuff like this, right? And so, I mean, God sees it. It's all the same. It's all a perversion. We see it in different degrees, but it's not a different thing at its core. It's just how progressed has it become, right? Yeah. So
force of light or force of darkness.
Yeah. What part has light with darkness, right?
Yeah.
You're either with me or against me. So for the listener here, quick lesson about where corruption came from. So when we talk about corruption, we talk about evil. We'll use those interchangeably for a moment. I really like that. God created everything and he made it good, right? And stuff worked the way that it was supposed to work. Things interacted properly, the different parts of nature and the different animals in the ecosystem and all of that. Things interacted the way that they were supposed to in a mutually supportive role. And one thing would work for another thing's good, whether that was people like Adam and Eve, or whether that was I mean, you can still see a lot of it happening in nature now. You know, you've got bees and they cause the flowers to flourish, and the flowers cause, the trees to flourish, and then the trees feed the bees. And there's this loop that happens where stuff cooperates. And so that's good. That's the Hebrew word for that is shalom. There's a wholeness to it. There's a rightness or a peace to it. And then a decision gets made that violates the process, right? It violates the right standing order of things, and so that's corruption. So that once that enters the world, it throws everything off. And you look at how is it that Alvin Plantinga said it? He said one sin in the garden happened, and look at the metaphysical maneuvering that's now necessary in order to put things back right. And we're not even through it yet. It's not going to happen until Jesus comes back and says, "Done. We're hitting the reset button." And it all came from one corruption, one deviation from the perfect standard. And so when we talk about corporate evil, this isn't some lower grade of evil than the warlord in Africa who's willing to spray lead at people and kill them all just because they're from a different tribe. To us, yes, it's different degrees. There's a different blast radius, different level of human carnage that hangs in the balance. But at its core, it's the same thing. Right, it's a corruption from what God actually designed. So that's where all of this came from, and that's what evil essentially is. Now, the weird part, to me at least, is as I pontificate momentarily, the weird part for me is that evil is not just the absence of good. It's not just like, people say, well, darkness is the absence of light, cold is the absence of heat, evil is the absence of good. Not exactly. It is a thing, and it has a nature, and it has characteristics, and evil acts in a certain way, and it replicates predictable patterns, and you do have to actually fight it as though it is something that really does exist, and you're expected to win, and you're expected to deny it, and it tempts you, but you just have to say no. And so you wind up with people with more power. They don't say no to evil temptations, and then airplanes end up going down, and 346 people end up dying, right? So corruption at its core is sin, it's evil, and the wages of sin is death. And that's just the way this goes.
And then, speaking of the crashes, you had the surviving family members. They said, we want Boeing to pay for the pain and suffering of our loved ones that they went through. These Boeing lawyers from Boeing Legal, who I dealt with through corporate investigations, that's part of Boeing Legal, HR is part of Boeing Legal, and ethics. These corporate lawyers from Boeing went in and said, well, it happened so fast that they didn't have time to know what was happening to them.
You're kidding.
That was the most ghoulish thing I have ever heard in my life, and it came out of the mouth of the lawyers of the company that I love. The pilots were talking at the point of impact. Everybody knew what was going on.
Jeez.
And there will be more coming out about that.
And so their defense was, don't worry, your family members didn't suffer. We don't owe you anything.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And I've got that newspaper article.
Keep it classy, lawyers.
Yeah. Woe unto you lawyers.
Somebody smart said that.
And then we had people, I brought in employee assistant program counselors because they had a couple of really good ones at that time in Everett. One of them came and spoke to my team, and then another manager brought her team. So because people were depressed. Christmas holiday, 8 to 10 days, you'd go to family members. Hey, how's work going? Oh, it's great. Or my boss is kind of giving me a rough time. But, and then it turned into what the heck is going on at Boeing? So that happened to me that year after the second MAX crash, I think, down in Olympia at Mark Musser's house. His family was asking me. Then I went to, I think your cousins in Tacoma. Then we went all the way up to Oak Harbor asking the same questions. I was really depressed at the end of that day.
Yeah.
And that happens to the employees.
Well, just so people hear this, to your credit, when you were working for Boeing and people would say, what's going on at Boeing? You never covered for them. You always said your answer, at least when I was around, was always something like, you might have phrased this differently, but in front of me, the way it usually came across was, people would say, what's going on at Boeing and what's up with these congressional hearings? And you would say, it's the best thing that could possibly happen. That it needs to happen, and I'm glad it's happening. And it's like, yeah, you don't go into CYA mode just because you're drawing a paycheck from them, So anyway, moral high five on that, on that
thanks.
front.
Checks in the mail, baby.
As we talk about corruption.
I'd like to talk about evil being extremely subtle too.
Mm-hmm.
Let me give you a phrase and tell me what that means. And you don't have to spend a bunch of time on it.
Yeah.
Intraspecies protein reallocation.
Intraspecies protein reallocation. All right, let's see. Go back to my classical education here.
5 seconds.
Yeah, I went to public school. This is not going to go well. Let's see.
I went to Monroe public school.
Intraspecies protein reallocation.
Yeah.
I'm going to say that's when one animal eats another one of a different species.
That's the definition of cannibalism.
Oh, intra.
Yeah,
in
intra.
the same species.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, how doublespeak softens the blow, and you'll see doublespeak in corporate America where, these charts are green because, and they'll lie with reporting and, just to make themselves look good.
Yep. So Jesus is calling guys out for this. I might read more than I need to here. Mark 7, starting in verse 9, he said to them, "You have a fine way of rejecting the commandment of God in order to establish your tradition. For Moses said, 'Honor your father and mother,' and whoever reviles his father and mother must surely die. But you say, if a man tells his father or his mother, 'Whatever you would have gained from me is Corban,' that is, dedicated to God, then you no longer permit him to do anything for his father and mother, thus making void the word of God by your tradition that you have handed down. And many such things you do." So, translation for the modern day, what he's saying there is there was this idea of Corban, which means dedicated to God, and that was something that was set apart that you don't have to follow the other ritual laws with. So if you wouldn't, if it was money, you wouldn't have to tithe on that money because the whole pot of money is set apart for God. So we're just going to exempt that from the pot that we're calculating our tithes from. If it was a field, we don't have to let this. We don't have to follow the planting laws in this field because it's dedicated to God, so that's in a separate category. But then you do that with stuff that you should be using to take care of your parents. He's like, you guys got ailing parents. They need help. And you're like, sorry, I'd be taking care of you, but everything I have is so holy that I can't, I can't spare it because it's dedicated to God. He's like, you're breaking a commandment to follow a commandment that you made up, you idiots. So, corruption, right?
Yeah.
Greed. And it was all in that subtle doublespeak. And I think it's the worst. Can I say that? I think probably that's accurate. It's the worst when it's the religious professionals doing it. Now, that's a term I learned from you, religious professionals. Did you come up with that?
I heard that from Pastor Ron Breckel back in the 80s. He talked about Christian professionals. Do you want to go there now?
Hey, man, yeah. I can't edit this episode, so we might as well. We just started it.
Yeah, and I've seen that with professing Christians in healthcare when I was a hospice chaplain. They know enough of the lingo to get the gig and look pious and really operate like unbelievers, under the scene. Something oftentimes brings that out when, whoa, we didn't see that coming.
When the pressure's on, they start acting like who they really are.
And you saw that many years ago when you were at another church and you were telling me, here's kind of what's being said to me, but here's what I'm seeing. And we talked about that. And those are Christian professionals, and your mom and I were so relieved when you landed feet first at Kennewick Baptist Church.
Yeah.
A great place.
Shout out KBC.
Yeah.
Love those guys. Yeah. And it's weird because, like Isaiah says it, I think Malachi says it also, they honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. But man, those lips, they can be pretty persuasive,
Yeah.
And for a long time too. And it's like you'll walk a mile down the road with somebody and a lot will happen in that mile. And you'll say, I've seen this person in every situation. I know what they're really made of. And then that one thing gets hit that's a threat to their thing or their identity or their idol or something. And the real them comes out. And it's like, man, the whole thing has been some kind of charade.
Yeah.
Right?
And a lot of times they're very well established in Christendom. With agencies, organizations.
Yeah, they know the people. They can drop the names.
Yeah. And down when we were living in Texas for 4 years, that was my first exposure after Pastor Breckel talked about Christian professionals, because this one supplier, by the way, Boeing sent me and my family, you guys, to these struggling suppliers, really to knock heads.
Yeah.
And a lot of them responded, and then they became profitable, and they thought, man, why didn't we? So anyway, but these guys were really, it was a cool hand Luke scenario down, just shaking that tree, boss, to the employees. They weren't treated well. But they were big in the community, good Baptist church going men, don't you know?
Yeah.
The name droppers, willful commitment failure. So you're going to see that.
Wait, define that. Willful commitment
They'll
failure?
commit and then have no intention of coming through. We all have failed in commitments, and then we have a recovery. Hey, how about I call you next, or we have dinner tomorrow night? Something.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're all going to fail. But this is willful. And alligator tears, baby. It's hard being me.
So hard.
It is hard. And and then when I saw the George W. Bush John Kerry debate, he said that it's hard.
It's so hard.
President.
That was Bush that said that, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, that was a softball for Kerry.
Yeah. And I don't know Bush's spiritual. He says he's a believer, and he's really strong on protecting the unborn.
Yeah.
But I don't know where he's at, know. But he did that.
Yeah, and you remember that better than I do. But didn't Kerry take that opportunity? He slapped him down for that pretty good.
Yeah.
As he should.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing, man. That victim mentality. It's like there's nothing Christ-like about it. I mean, Jesus was honest about his suffering, but he never asked people to feel sorry for him. And that's one of the things is with Christian professionals is as soon as with some of them. I mean, I shouldn't universalize it, but as soon as you push on them and question something, don't question the holy man, because then they'll be like, I'm being attacked. Do you see him repressing me? I'm being repressed.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, this guy really thinks he's untouchable. I don't know.
Yeah, but it gets them in the door.
Yeah.
And then they can act like the unbeliever in the business world. And if you go on YouTube and you type in hospice fraud, you'll see where this is happening in healthcare, where private equity money is coming in, and they're getting into healthcare. And, there's hacking and slashing. People are getting laid up. People are upset, scared. Their families are scared. Those are private equity firms. The non-for-profit hospices, they're not tagged for Medicare fraud. It's these private pay that are getting into different aspects of healthcare.
So you're saying, if I understand you right, then you're saying they'll go in and they'll bill for hospice services that they're not providing? What does fraud look like there?
Fraud looks like people are on Medicare, they're on hospice service, and they really shouldn't be. They don't qualify. So many years ago, when I was a new volunteer at Providence Hospice, that's a not-for-profit, I was told about a for-profit hospice in San Diego. The feds went in and shut it down because they had tons of people on service. So they're getting Medicare money for that. And they just shut them down. And they were a subsidiary of, take a guess.
Well, you already said Providence.
No, Providence is they're a nonprofit.
Not-for-profit.
So
okay, I don't know.
Okay. The one that got shut down in San Diego was a subsidiary of Roto-Rooter. Yeah.
What?
Hey, I smell money. Let's go ahead and open up a hospice. Let's get in that business. Let's hire some nurses, some bath aides. And they would build it up. They would get the maximum people on service and then pull away the services and then sell the company when the maximum profits show.
Roto-Rooter opened a hospice division.
Yeah, it was someone owned a Roto-Rooter, and then they wanted to get into the hospice business.
So they basically started another business and opened it up as a DBA of Roto-Rooter because they already had the paperwork done?
I don't know. Maybe. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Corruption, right?
It's corruption. Yeah. So you see that. And that does nothing but it kills morale for employees and their families.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you look at what it takes to be a hospice worker, and that takes a deep commitment and a level of motivation and stuff. And when you see something like that, I mean, those are the last people in the world you want to discourage.
Yeah.
You need them around.
Yeah, and their nurses are phenomenal. All of them are. At the care center, when they had it in Everett, families would always come in. How many days, weeks, hours? What do you think, Merle? I said, I don't know.
Yeah.
And because I was always wrong when I did think I knew. And then they'd ask the doctor, and the doctor would say, 5 days. And you go ask the hospice nurse; they were always pretty much spot on. They knew they're phenomenal.
Yeah, yeah, and back to the religious professional thing, the fraud and the corruption within that. It is tricky in the Christian world because, and probably I would guess the religious world even outside of Christianity, because you're supposed to extend trust within your faith community, and you're supposed to be able to, right? The downside of that is that makes it a really good place for wolves to hide. Right, because you've got people who are hurting. If you can talk a good game, then you can persuade a lot of people who maybe don't know as much as you and things like that. And yeah, I mean, you can get into a position of leadership. If you're good at your shtick, you can get into a position of leadership pretty easily, or you can find a place that will let you in and hurt a lot of people. So I think the only way to guard against that level of religious evil, right? Whether you want to use the word corruption, evil, fraud, whatever it is, wolves in sheep's clothing. The only way to guard against that is to have a church full of people who read their own Bibles, right? And they don't all have to be, professional theologians. They don't all have to know Greek and Hebrew and things like that. You just got to crack your Bible open and read the thing and let the Holy Spirit talk to you. And the church will have discernment, right? The Word of God feeds the people of God, and they protect the bride of Christ and things like that. And those guys will get sniffed out, but man, we don't. I'm trying to pick my words correctly because I don't want to condemn somebody that doesn't deserve it. I do notice a rough correlation between evil pastors who have found a place that will let them be a parasite to the flock, right? I have a nice cushy gig here. I got a pulpit. I got a paycheck. I'm going to ride this thing out.
Host-parasite relationship.
Exactly, yeah. And that there's a correlation there between the pastors that land there and the biblical literacy of the people. And it seems like, and this is anecdotal definitely, but it seems like less biblical fluency and regularity in the text from average Joe church member in the pew, you get more abuses. Okay? Well, and so here's the converse of that. I'm going to give a shout out to my buddy Chris, who he sadly passed away a few years back on Resurrection Sunday. Had an organ failure, just kind of came out of nowhere. He was sick, but we didn't know it was going to happen like that. And so he was a brand new believer, and when he got saved, it was really interesting because I met him before he was saved, and then he got saved, and his discernment went through the roof quickly. And I went on I think it was my first mission trip. I had a friend of mine from a different ministry come here and preach, and Chris, brand new believer, called me up when I got back, and he was like, something was wrong with that guy. He was off. I'm like, what are you talking about? He was like, I don't know, it just didn't feel right. And he said he seemed to be allergic to the Bible. And I'm like, that's an interesting thing. He said something like that. I'm like, that's an interesting thing for Chris to say. This guy had been saved maybe 6 months. I don't know.
Wow.
So I go on the website and I listen to the sermon, and I'm just like, yeah, what's up with that? And it was like, I think it was 17 minutes into the sermon before he even mentioned a Bible verse. And then when he did, it was in passing, but just to support what he had already decided to say. He wasn't really, exegeting the text, right? And so I'm like, yeah, something's off. Anyway, it turns out later on, this guy had been carrying on an affair for a long time, and he got exited from the ministry where he was. And I'm like, the new believer sniffed that out.
Yep.
I got a room full of people who are more mature in the faith, and this guy sniffed it out. And why? It's because he was dependent on the Word of God. Every day he's reading that thing, and he just had the discernment. So
that's fantastic.
Yeah. So the truth really is, the truth really is an antidote to a lot of this stuff. Open the cage and let the lion roar, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and like I've explained before, you had the Enron boys, you had Elizabeth Holmes, and these people at all these different corporations.
Boy, she was creepy.
Yeah. They all passed their ethics course in university, and they all went on to do this, but they don't have the God-based ethics. And when I hired in at Boeing for the first time in '79, I was being trained and worked with World War II veterans, Korean War veterans, and entire Boeing families where the adults worked at Boeing.
Yeah.
A lot of them were Christians, a lot of them weren't, but they had that God-based ethic,
Yeah, or you could be James Comey, who not only did he take an ethics class, but after he got fired from the FBI, he went and taught one at what was it, Cornell, some Ivy League school,
or probably Columbia.
Yeah, it might have been. It might have been Columbia. Yeah, goes and teaches an ethics class
because they didn't have any openings at Evergreen College.
Right, right. Well, they should have after they let that Brent
Weinberg.
Something like that. Yeah. They canned him. They could have gotten Comey.
Yeah,
missed opportunities.
Yeah,
yeah. He writes a book about courage or something. I mean, the brazen nature of some of this stuff too is really surprising.
It really is. And you look at the book, The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli. That's the playbook for Mao Zedong. A lot of people in corporate America, whether they know it or not, it's just lack of transparency. Tell people what they want to hear to get you to where you want to be. And then I would see people, they would get promoted, and then the first day in that new gig, they would work on the next promotion. And then we had a lot of managers, some bad managers up in Everett. They'd go down to South Carolina to Boeing down there, and then they get a quick promotion to senior manager. Then they come back up here and make real money. And they're they're the mercenaries. They're not the shepherds.
Well, and I'll say this. There's nothing wrong in a capitalistic system. There's nothing dishonest about playing the field, right?
Right.
And in fact, you were always putting out resumes. And if I understand right, you never really had much of an intention on jumping ship. You were just always seeing what was out there.
Yeah.
Just because why not, right?
Yep.
Now, I mean, in my world, that's not the right thing for me to do because I've got a calling, right? I got to shepherd a flock. But if you're participating in the marketplace and you're trading goods for compensation or services for compensation, nothing wrong with that at all. So then at what point does play in the field and work in the market become stone stepping and corruption and that kind of thing that you're describing?
I think when it attacks relationships, when people are commodities that you can use or just push off to the side, you don't have to give them your word and fulfill your commitment. When you get rid of people, I think that's a real red flag right there. We had a difference there is my buddy John Barnett, the whistleblower from South Carolina that tragically lost his life. He went down to South Carolina, and he didn't go down there for a promotion. He went down there to make a real difference. And you read some of his story. He was just knocking heads all the time. They were calling him at home multiple times a day, just intimidating him and everything. He went down there to make a difference.
Yeah, and he's still in the middle of all of that, found time to get you some real good alligator tail and share it.
That was early on before we lost touch.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But and I had an employee, longtime employee. I was talking with this person a couple weeks ago, and she said, I can remember you and John walking into the biggest building in the world, and we could hear your cowboy boots. We both wore them, and you guys were chatting it up at the other end of the building,
Yeah.
So, good man. Good airplane man.
Yeah, that's a sad thing because he just got, in some sense, he just got devoured by the system, right? And that is another thing about this whole form of evil is that it's very, well, to go back to what you said, cannibalistic. I mean, it just finds good intentions and just eats them alive. It just smothers them somehow. Never stays in its lane.
It can swallow you like a whale swallows a piece of plankton.
Yeah.
And there's no guarantee you're going to have, in quality especially, you're going to have a job the next day. Because if you don't have the right people mad at you, you're not doing your job.
Yeah, and that's a truism in a lot of areas of life.
Yeah,
right?
You remember I got fired from that one aerospace machine shop for holding up the shipment of structural parts that they made for airplanes.
I got to get you to tell that story because the way I remember it is the guy told you that he wanted the problem to go away and you assured him it would, and then you made him go away or something like that. Am I remembering that right?
Well, this is a different one.
Oh,
I think. Yeah.
Well, okay. So that story that I remember was he brought you in and said, you said, hey, you got a problem with the process here. And he said, I want this to go away. And you said, okay, it will. And then basically called the FAA and said, hey, we got a problem here. And they came in and shut it down.
Oh, okay. That was at a supplier. So this one was where they had, I think, 2 or 3 previous quality managers would look the other way while they fraudulently made these structural airplane parts. And I found out about it, and I said, well, why hasn't this been addressed? Well, no one wants to get fired. I said, okay, I understand. These aren't going anywhere.
Yeah.
I'll be the one stamping them off. And then the owner of the company, he just said, yeah, you're done. So
now, where were we living when that? Without the name of the company,
Yeah.
where were we living when that happened?
we were at Clearview, in the Clearview
Okay,
house. Yeah.
okay, I remember that one.
Remember, I came home and said, "Hey, I got fired. Let's have spaghetti."
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. And we did. That was some good spaghetti.
Yeah, and then the one of the people I trained, who in Germany, how to at a passenger seat supplier. He happened to be this is years later. He came back and he was the Boeing field rep, like I used to be, over that supplier. So I called him and I said, "Hey, the darndest thing just happened to me. I got fired for this, and they're sending out substandard parts that they're making." So he knew the owner, and he knew the owner was a biker, and Sturgis was coming. So he was heading to Sturgis. So he goes, I waited till he got about halfway down before I called him and said, "We're pulling all our contracts from you." So anyway, and
Justice.
Yeah, and I said, "Hey, that's great, but I still don't have a job, And then I got hired back into Boeing. They were on the upswing after the 9/11 thing.
Yeah, yeah. And if you foster relationships, like you're saying, along the way, you don't treat people like stepping stones. And a lot of times that community comes back around, and you can, they can help you out when you need it. And
yeah, and there's a terrible price even for crooked managers. There's a lot of stress. There's a lot of people are seeing therapists or self-medicate, and it's hard on not only good managers but the bad managers too.
Yeah. So what's the antidote then? I mean, because I guess I'm talking about corporate corruption more than, biting off a big subject like political corruption or something like that. But, what is the antidote to something like that? Because you've made the comment that at Boeing, for example, and I don't know how hyperbolic this was, but basically if somebody gets let out in handcuffs, the problem will fix itself.
Yeah,
right?
that'll wake people up.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the FAA would have the FBI show up at a supplier where there was corruption going on and just take them right out.
And that's
in
happened.
handcuffs. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So then how about on a broad scale? I mean, there's a culture here that this is a result of. It happens at GE, then it happens at Boeing. These guys are all on a carousel, and even if they get fired, they get their balloon, settlement or whatever. They get their what do you call it, severance package, and they're on to the next one. So is there any way to kind of chip away at this?
It's really complicated. I was thinking about calling Elon Musk and say, "Will you just buy the Boeing company?" But I don't think he's not returning my call.
I'll work on him for you.
Thank you. You have several issues that need to be worked. The CEO, the board, they have to go. But who gets board members? Who elects board members? The shareholders. Now, you have private equity majority shareholders. They want a bottom line. They want to look at everything. So they're basically, and they voted for Calhoun to get his, $40 million severance package? Yeah, the shareholders. So it's the majority shareholders, the super investors. So that they'll probably just, like Senator Halling said in the most recent hearings to Calhoun, you're just hollowing out the company. They're just going to do that, then they'll move on to the next.
They're termites.
Yeah, I'm just hoping for some divine intervention somehow,
Well, and my mind goes to generational changes, right? Because there is such a thing as generational corruption also. You inherit, to a large degree, the ethics of your parents because that's your primary example, Now, you're a guy that's changed a legacy in a lot of ways. Me and my sister, we were raised in a context that was nothing like the one you were raised in. So you made changes that affected a legacy, right? And now my kids are getting raised in a context much more like mine than yours, than their grandfather. And so it is possible to change legacies. But man, that's some work, right?
Yeah. In my generation, I failed forward, as I say. If I wouldn't have married your mom, it would, wouldn't have worked out. If we weren't going to this church all the way in Kirkland, getting real good teaching, it wouldn't have happened.
That's the job for men, right? Marry a woman smarter than you and fail forward.
Yep.
And hand it off to the next generation.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Fall up.
That's right.
Yeah, like Biden. He's a good example of it. Yeah. Anyway, did I just say that?
No, you didn't.
I thought we weren't talking about political corruption.
No.
Anyway.
We don't have time. I mean, there's so much other corruption.
Yeah. I saw a great meme, though, that it said Biden was almost full term, so the Democrats had to abort him.
I saw that, too.
Ooh, insightful. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Anyway,
I thought it was funny.
Because it's true. Yeah. Anyway, you were saying something. I'm sorry.
We have familial evil. You work much more than I do, and your team works with people that have suffered familial evil.
Abuse in the family, things like that.
And a great book on that is called People of the Lie by M. Scott Peck.
M. Scott Peck.
Yeah, Christian psychiatrist, late Scott Peck. But boy, he's got some scenarios. Lyndon Johnson, the lies that in the Gulf of Tonkin incident that got us into Vietnam. A family where one of the siblings, one of the children, took his life, and they wound up giving the gun to the younger brother as a birthday present or Christmas present. Weird stuff.
Yeah, just like psychologically abusive in ways that are creative.
Yeah, and have no way they were doing something evil.
Yeah.
So that's a really good book.
Yeah, that was an interesting book too. I read that after you recommended it, and it was basically for folks. Just so you know, like if you're listening to this and I'm your pastor, I'll just say I'm not sold on his solutions necessarily. True. But his diagnosis of the problems was really well articulated. And basically, he said when you make peace with and embrace a paradigm where falsehood has a place in it, then that goes to places that you don't want it to go over the course of generations, and it's horrendous.
Yeah, and it can be 1 degree off, and that can be 80 miles, 50 miles down the road.
Yep.
Another form of evil, I see this a lot, is I call it therapeutic evil, because the American Psychological Association denies the existence of evil, because then they'll have to admit, well, then there's got to be a good, and then there's got to be
a standard,
and a giver of the standard.
Yep.
They don't want to go down that at all. So we see a lot of the what used to be just called evil on the news is now, I wonder what pushed them psychologically over the edge to do that school shooting.
Yeah, well, there's that, and there's also the side of therapeutic evil, which is unconditional affirmation. So people do something evil, and then you affirm it in them because that's their truth or whatever, and you wind up with drag queens at story hour and people normalizing pedophilia and things like that. It's because that's the natural consequence of therapeutically engaging evil and just saying, like, listen, what's right for you may not be right for them, and you affirm things in people, right, that really need to be repented of.
Yep.
Yeah. Therapeutic evil.
And then, the public schools, everybody that I respect that talks about the public school problems, they always say, as I do, most teachers are dedicated, yada, yada. I believe that. Yep. But they're packing them in now with teachers that are actually diagnosing or assessing that they have this condition or that condition. They're bringing the children's family in groups together and having questions. Hey, you ever been really mad at your dad? Yeah. You ever thought about killing yourself? They have checklists, and now they have psychologists going into schools, coming out of these secular universities. This is mental health,
and certainly not informing the parents or giving them a voice in it or whatever.
Right?
Yeah. So another book you recommended to me, which was great, was Bad Therapy by Abigail Schreier.
Yeah. I don't read any of these books. I just
tell me about them.
Yes, yeah, you'll love it.
That's all right. I'll do the legwork for you. You guys should get that book. If you are a parent, you should get and read twice Bad Therapy by Abigail Schreier. She blows the lid off of this thing where where kids are managed with techniques rather than parented, right? And the techniques come from outside the family, and they replace parenting. No discipline, no structure, things like that. And she says, here's what this causes. And now we've been doing this long enough that the data is in, right? We can see the effects of this stuff. And so she just exposes all that. It's beautiful.
And the parents are attacked for hovering, taking them to all their soccer games and this and that. That's considered hovering. The parentification. They're so clingy that you had to be the parent for them.
Yeah,
that's evil.
Well,
that's evil.
And transferring the job of God's structure in the family to what she calls it the expertocracy, right? Like she says that she's got this great analysis in there in one of the later chapters, it might be the last chapter, about how informal relationships are now seen as suspect because they don't involve an expert. And so they might do damage because this person that you're talking to might not really know the psychological ins and outs of what they're talking about, ignoring the fact that this person that they're talking to is their grandmother. And you need that transfer of wisdom across generations, right? And so they downplay these relationships and then transfer the expectation of help and support to the experts. Mm-hmm. But the experts don't have a stake in how this kid turns out, right?
Yeah, outsourcing.
Evil stuff.
It is, yeah. And it's assigning kids with childhood trauma teenagers. Oh, you were traumatized when this happened. So they're using like one of the Kardashians would reach for the wrong mascara, and they'd use the word trauma. It's a buzzword. Everyone's using it now, right? So they're throwing out the word adversity, which is stuff that you can learn to absorb and get really strong. It'll make you strong. We call it resilience.
Yep, resilience.
That's kind of another buzzword, but it applies in this case.
It's a good one. Yeah.
So, yeah, adversity should be almost cherished,
Yeah,
and it's not all trauma, but it's labeled. Everything's labeled as trauma.
And some trauma's good.
Yeah.
Right? Have you ever met somebody that hasn't ever been through anything? It's like you wouldn't trust them with anything.
The CIA won't talk to them at all. They want someone with the right amount of trauma.
Yeah.
Not too much, but
right.
Yeah.
Well, and back to Schreier, she said something that she said she was talking about grandfather. She said sometimes the reason that talking to a grandfather is better than talking to a therapist is because at some point the grandfather is going to say to the kid, "Go play. You're fine. There's nothing wrong with you. Relax."
Yeah. That one meme from the picture back in the 50s, the little girl and the mom both have aprons in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Cooking. Mom, I feel like a boy today. And Mom looks over. You're not. That's it.
Right. I just saw one of those same picture, and it said, "Mom, what does DEI mean?" And she says, "Didn't earn it."
Right. Yeah. Wow. So, yeah.
I don't know. I feel like the list could go on for 6 more episodes about what types of evil. How would I say this? How evil is contagious, right? Whether it's a corporate environment like we started out talking about, or a political environment like we've really tried not to talk about and failed a little bit in this conversation because it's so prevalent, or a family or a generational environment, or even just a professional straight across coworker environment. Like corruption really is contagious because the immediate benefits are so alluring sometimes. The bottom line, or the social benefit, or the promotion, or whatever it is. And so it just spreads.
Yeah, and that's why these whistleblowers, what they get labeled a lot because it's easy. Oh, malcontent, hates the company. People think that a corrupt manager thinks when he's hiring somebody, he's hiring a job description. And that person's going to do what's in that job description. So I can go ahead and, cut corners or do whatever. But someone that loves their company, and you see this in whistleblowers, they go, "No, this is unacceptable," when everyone else just looks down at their paperwork at their desk and doesn't want to make waves.
Yeah.
But when corruption becomes institutionalized,
and then it becomes part of the system, Yeah, somebody shared with me recently a quote from somebody who I would be glad to give credit to, but I can't remember who said it. But my buddy Levi, he said to me, the purpose of the system is what it does. And I said, okay, that seems pretty obvious. Right. And he said, no, but when you think a system is malfunctioning, but it keeps doing that with a frequency that is predictable, that is the purpose of the system. It is to malfunction. So we were talking politics at the time, right? And it's like, oh, there's so much division in the country. This isn't what the system was designed to do. It was designed to unify us around federalism. And he says, maybe not. Because if it keeps malfunctioning and creating the opposite effect from what it claims, then the function of the system is not what it claims that it is, it's what it actually does. And so when there's corruption in a company and it keeps happening, the point of the system, after a certain number of reps, the point of it is to recreate that quote, broken outcome. Oh, sorry, we won't do it again, like you said. And you go through, you say, yeah, this really went wrong. It didn't go wrong. They did exactly what they wanted to have happen, right? And it was profitable.
It's profitable. And then, at Boeing, I'd run into this with like improper stamping. Someone that would stamp off a job that it isn't built the way the instructions told them to, or the blueprints, or a quality inspector that would know it's wrong and buy it off. That's improperly stamping. That's carrying the name of God in vain, basically, with your stamp.
It really is, yeah.
We've always done it this way.
Yeah, and there is no authority except that which is given by God, right? Romans 13 says that. And so if you misuse your authority, and you're a Christian, you're carrying the name of Christ, you are taking the name, you're carrying on yourself the name of the Lord your God to no effect, in vain.
Yeah.
And God will not hold him guiltless.
Right, and that's when Sunday, of course, doesn't talk to Monday or your whole business week. But, yeah, so it's just... It's a different deal where the Christian needs to stand up and be vocal. You look at the Old Testament prophets. They were told to go out and say, "Thus saith the Lord," and say some stuff that is going to got a lot of them killed.
Yep.
And they didn't care. They knew it. You stand in the gap, you tell it like it is, and then you, Psalm 15, you accept the consequences full on, and you don't complain about it.
Yeah, and then the Lord's in charge of that too. He's in charge of your consequences and your loss. So, moral of the story, Christian, lose your job. If something needs to be said and it's going to cost you your job, let it cost you your job. That's temporary anyway. You can't take it with you when you go. And I'll just tell you this, guys. I know that it's scary. I know that when you're looking down the barrel of no paycheck. And listen, I'm not getting into any of these stories right now, but I know that from experience too. But I'm telling you, you're listening to a guy talk in my dad here in Merle Meyers, who it has cost him a job in order to say what needs to be said, and he's still standing. And he raised a family in that environment. In fact, it happened a couple of times when we were growing up. And so, have some courage, say what needs to be said, because it has to be Christians that put a stop to the cycle, because nobody else has really a philosophically consistent reason to do so. We're the ones with the transcendent being that says, this is the way it shall be, thus saith the Lord. And so if we compromise on that, we can't depend on anybody else to do it. Other people have integrity. There are non-Christians with integrity.
Sure.
But we're the only ones that can have it reliably, because we've got a God backing us up who we know will bless what he commands. So stand up, guys. Let it cost you something.
There's a single mom lost her job for standing up. Single mom. And then I know another airplane woman, dear friend of ours, same thing. She's paid a heck of a price getting a lower rating so she could get forced out of the company. So, yeah.
Let it cost you.
She stood up.
Well, Dad, Merle, whatever, it's weird for me to call you that. Thank you so much for being here.
Certainly.
Appreciate it. I said it last time, and I'll say it again. We got to do this again.
Yeah, let's do that again.
Yeah, I'll bait you with some grandkids. You come down and visit, and I'll throw a microphone in front of your face and say, teach us something. So anyway, listen, guys, if you got questions about any of this, then text them to 509-867-0070, and we'll hit those on a Q&A episode of Hungry for Wisdom. And give us a like, give us a follow, share this episode, give us 5 stars if you think we earned it, and that really helps get this content out to more people so that we can, just get more people engaged in a biblical worldview training setting, man. We want people to read their Bibles, compare what they're seeing in daily life to their Bibles, and then adopt God's opinion of some things. We will see you guys next time.